Welcome back to a new episode of the new Unfiltered. I have one of the founders of Beehiiv. If you don't know Beehiiv, you probably live under a rock. But Tyler Denk, he started this with two other guys. Used to work at the Morning Brew, and you just raised a fuck ton of money. And it's an incredible platform that I have now invested $50 a month in, which I think is more than I spent on MailChimp.
It's like 0.001% of a fuck ton that you're paying monthly.
Exactly. Nice. But I do appreciate knowing the person now who I'm giving this money to. And you're not an asshole. Like, you're not an asshole LA guy.
Well, I've only been here for 15 minutes, so...
But I can read people very well, so I would have known immediately. Cool. Okay, what's your story? Like, how did you do this?
I think you hinted at some of it, depending on where you want me to start with this story. But
beginning.
I can go to the beginning. Started a company in college. Me and two co-founders, we built something to connect entrepreneurs and startups to software developers at the University of Maryland. Taught ourselves how to code. Amazing experience, had no money, broke college students, wanted to figure out, one, how to build a website, how to grow an audience, how to scale this company. It did not become a multi-billion-dollar company, which is why I've never heard of VentureStorm. But it did teach me a lot about entrepreneurship, startups, and probably most importantly, how to code and do software. And so after graduating, we kind of shut that down. And Austin Reef, who's the co-founder of Morning Brew, now the CEO, reached out to me. He's a good friend from Baltimore. And he said, we have so many ideas to build XYZ at Morning Brew. We don't have an engineer. Do you want to help us out while you're looking for a full-time job? So I began applying to jobs, typical consulting jobs in Washington, D.C. Because I did mechanical engineering at college, and a lot of people just kind of funnel into D.C. consulting jobs. Was applying around the summer of 2017, I believe, and started building stuff for Morning Brew. One thing led to another. I was spending 60 hours a week from my parents' basement, just building stuff for Morning Brew. Got a job offer at Deloitte and was going to be a technology consulting person at Deloitte. And then at the same time, Austin goes, do you want to come up to New York and join Morning Brew full time? Morning Brew now well known, 5 million readers. Most people are familiar with what Morning Brew was or is. At the time, Morning Brew was 50,000 subscribers, small newsletter. The two co-founders, Alex and Austin, and then a writer. And they worked out of an NYU dorm, campus, incubator type program. So far from glamorous, far from well-known, far from a sure thing. And I had a ton of student debt, still have a ton of student debt. And it's my parents, and just the natural progression would be go to DC, close to home, sure, safe job at Deloitte. Technology consulting, cool. My girlfriend lived in DC as well. It's a very easy, safe decision. And then the best advice I ever got was from a friend, different Austin, and he goes, you're gonna be one of 40,000 people in that exact same job at Deloitte, or you could be the only person doing what you're doing at Morning Brew. And I would bet on yourself. And to this day, probably that resonated with me more than anything else. And so doing what I've done typically in life is take the harder, unsure route and kind of make a bet on myself. That led me to joining Morning Brew as the second employee, moving up to New York, quitting Deloitte before I ever started, a week before I was supposed to start, leaving girlfriend, apartment, good friend behind in DC, and just kind of running up to New York very spontaneously. And then Morning Brew was an incredible experience. I was 22, 23 in New York. Had no boss really. They gave me a lot of autonomy to make my own decisions. I was managing $500,000 a month in paid ad spend. I was building the tech in-house. I was meeting with other industry people and media and newsletters in New York, and really just figuring it out on the fly. So from a personal growth and development, an unreal opportunity to give someone who just wants to learn and figure out how. This is my first ever job. I guess to take a step back, I never had an internship in college because I was building my startup, and I thought I was going to be the shit with this awesome startup right out of college. So at University of Maryland, everyone would go to the career fair, get internships. I'd be these guys are such losers. I'm building a startup, it's going to be so successful. Joke was on me because it wasn't successful and I had no internship experience and struggled to get a job. But fast forward to Morning Brew, I just had so much green space to figure out things on my own. Austin was the world's best boss and manager and wasn't hey, do this, this is what we expect. He's like, we need to grow faster. Can you figure out how to do that? And I would just try different things and build different things. So then fast forward from there, Morning Brew went on to get acquired by Business Insider. I saw the newsletter grow from 50K subscribers to 3.5 million. I led product and engineering as like a self-taught software developer and like kind of built this internal tech. I ran growth for a while, spending, like I said, $500,000 a month, and like just kind of like figured it out, which was like unbelievable. And then looking at this space in like 2020, Substack and other players kind of emerged as like sexy new newsletter type companies. And I just had such a unique perspective of, I actually know what it took to get Morning Brew from small to like very large. And I know what data we collected. I know like the different tech we used, the platform, what worked, what didn't, and had such like a unique perspective outside of, I know how to build software. It was like, I know how to build software that works for people who want to build a newsletter. And it was just like right time, right place. So summer of 2020, left Morning Brew, joined Google as like kind of like a experimental, see what big company life is about. Big company life, not for me. Raised money and then started Beehiiv in 2021, I believe. And that's my quick bio and story of like how I got to where I am right now.
You make it seem so chill to just like raise money and then started a company. You make it seem so easy.
So when we raised our seed round, it was 2020, like different time, I guess, in terms of like hype cycle, crypto, money was a lot easier to come by. It wasn't like necessarily easy. It took a month to raise our initial seed round of like 2.6 million, which in the grand scheme of things, like I think is good, I guess. But like,
good.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. So I was actually in LA that summer. So I was living in New York at the time, and typically people go out to like the Hamptons for like a summer house in New York. But we kind of shit the bed, didn't get a Hamptons house. So me and my friend group of like 8 close friends got a house in Venice, like right on the beach. So we spent July in Venice, and it was the perfect time because like we were kind of building the tech then. It was almost ready to launch. But like what we needed was money to like launch and raise and like go full time. And so I spent all of July in LA just like networking, taking calls, which is great because it's hard to get like deep work and be productive in a house with like 7 other guys in Venice. But when you're just taking calls and networking, showing up to different happy hour events and pitching the company.
Yeah.
So that was a very condensed 1-month fundraise. It was like my 1 month while I was in LA. We raised the round, went full time, and I moved across the country and launched the company kind of at the same time.
Growing up, did you think you were going to be an entrepreneur?
I love startups. I love tech. I'm very opinionated about shit. And so when I see things that don't make sense or things that are successful that aren't that great and could be better, like that's what really gets me excited of like opportunity and like, I don't know, it's really fun to build things and have people interact with something that you built. And I love tech. Like I nerd out on like early like Facebook or Twitter stories of like how they grew the company, how they built it. So I've always followed that, like the Silicon Valley HBO show, even though it's like a satire almost, like love that type of environment. So yeah, I've always been like very entrepreneurial. I did technology entrepreneurship minor in school. I started the company in school. I tried like laundry services at University of Maryland to make money. I spent my like allocated student loan money for rent my senior year, and we ended up just doing like a senior bar crawl. So I've always like found ways to like make money somehow. But yeah, I mean, I love startups. I love tech.
You said you had a lot of student debt, so it makes me think you didn't come from a ton of money.
Very middle class, like maybe skewed lower, if anything. Yeah.
And what'd your parents do?
So my dad worked at Social Security pretty much his entire life after graduating high school. So I was the first one to go to college. So neither of my parents went to college. My dad, I don't know if he had any jobs before Social Security, but was there for 48 years. He met my mom at Social Security as well. As soon as I was born, my mom stopped working. So like stay-at-home mom, and my dad remained at Social Security. So I like one of the things I'm most guilty about is kind of giving my parents shit for like making me have to pay for college because a lot of my friends didn't.
Of course.
And it's very stressful, like having over 100K of student debt. And then you're like out in the world by yourself. You're paying for rent in New York, very expensive city, trying to live like a normal social life, making the least money you'll probably ever make in your career, just graduating. and having like a ton of student debt to pay. And so, yeah, it didn't come from a ton of money. I've had everything I've needed. Like I never felt like underprivileged. Like I had a car when I got my license and was able to drive to school and wherever. I had like computers, phones. Like I wasn't like poor by any means, but didn't come from a ton of money. And that's also been like a huge like motivating factor, I'd say. Because like watching my dad work as hard as he has, like he does like side jobs, like detailing cars is like a passion of his. And he would wake up at 4:30 in the morning his entire career going to work at Social Security. So I think in retrospect, playing like armchair psychologist or therapist, there's a lot of like my work ethic and drive that I think I got from watching my parents or my dad work.
You're a true entrepreneur. It's so nice to meet someone in LA from the East Coast who isn't like, yeah, XYZ gave me this amount of money. And that's like pretty much everyone I know here, which isn't a bad thing. It just gives you a different upper hand than I think a lot of like born and bred entrepreneurs, and having to go through that period of not knowing what you're doing and like how to fail and how to get back up. You said your first company, the startup in college, failed. How do you define failure? Like, why did it fail?
Yeah, so it was kind of a mix between finding a technical co-founder and being able to connect to other like, so it was kind of like an Upwork, like freelance type marketplace, but also finding a co-founder. Mm-hmm. So on the finding the co-founder side, like really hard to monetize. I take a step back and say it was just a bad market to go after. It was initially students because we were students, which is like the classic mistake that every student entrepreneur does. They look around at like frat parties, laundry services, trying to get booze.
Yeah.
And they're like, how can we make this better? Like skipping lines at the bar, like dumb shit like that is like always what college entrepreneurs are looking to build. So we looked around. Maryland had a top 15 entrepreneurship program, top 15 computer science program. Everyone in the business school had business ideas and business plans. The computer science kids like wanted more opportunities to build things. Totally different demographics for the most part. And so the idea was how we bring them together. Everyone's feeding us that college is the best time to start a company. So why not try to build and like encapsulate more entrepreneurship on college campuses? So that was the initial probably fault of going after students because they have no money. And then when we pivoted more to just startups, they also typically have no money, especially because we were at like the formation of startup. So you're looking for a technical co-founder. You probably don't have a product, probably haven't raised money, you probably don't have much money. So the business model was the problem of how do we charge startups? Even if we did the best job possible and connected you to like a 10 out of 10 technical co-founder, like we're not taking equity because there's like a bunch of legal processes involved with that. And like, where do we monetize? So like, it wasn't the best business model. It was a difficult business. Then we just got into like kind of like freelance type work of, okay, you're in DC, you're a startup. How can you leverage a network of college like software developers to help build your startup for cheaper, and they're local and they're getting experience? But then it's just a volume play. It's like you need if you're taking 5% transaction fees, you need thousands of dollars and like hundreds of thousands of dollars to the market. We didn't raise money. We kind of didn't know what we didn't know. So I could go on forever. Like that's like kind of why it failed. In retrospect, there's like a lot of learnings from it. Mm-hmm. What I take away from it was, I think the inception was we were trying to create a company, a tech company, without being technical ourselves. So we needed the product. And that led us to teaching ourselves how to code and build it from scratch. So I mechanical engineer by trade at school, taught myself software throughout building this company. We had no money and needed to grow. So we were just the scrappiest team possible. We were like, I was writing the most cringeworthy Medium post and blog post of like how to start a company in college, just to hope that people would land on that article and then sign up for like, we were obviously plugging our own startup at the end of every article. We did the whole Quora thing where you answer questions on Quora.
Oh yeah.
And then you like at the end of the answer, you're like, by the way, if you want help with that, sign up for VentureStorm. We would do Reddit subreddits, any like free way to get people into our platform was something we experimented with. So it taught me like one, coding, two, scrappiness of like how to scale with like no money. And then, yeah, I mean, those are probably the main two. Also just like the scrappiness of being an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
So while like our junior and senior year, when most of our friends were going to tailgates and spending their Saturdays drinking at the bar and then going to the football game, we were driving to Harvard, University of Michigan, University of Toronto, and sponsoring college hackathons, because that's like you don't know what a hackathon is, like when software developers on campus stay for like 48 hours and code and like sleep on the auditorium floor.
Did you do that?
So we sponsor, as students, we were able to get like a cheap sponsorship because half of our marketplace was college student developers. And so we thought if we could get in front of them at these hackathons, they would sign up, they'd go by our booth and like put in their email. But that ended up having us drive to Toronto and then sleep on the auditorium floor, try to get like 50 signups and then drive back to Maryland. And we would do that pretty much all junior and senior year. So it taught me a lot of like sacrifice and just like any means to get the business from point A to point B was something we were willing to experiment with.
You said what you don't know, you don't know or something. So do you think that being naive is something that can make you successful as an entrepreneur because you're not as fearful of failure?
Yeah, I mean, I would almost attribute being naive to like a lot of the success that I've had. So like at Morning Brew, when we hit like a bottleneck of our writers at the time were like copy and pasting the stories into like an HTML template, and it was like the most laborious process ever. And there would be a mistake at 11 o'clock at night. We'd have to start all over again and be up to like 1, 2 a.m. to fix it. So we needed to build like a content management system. And like the more experienced person would say, oh, I have contacts at Chorus, like Vox's software, or like there's all these CMSs online that I know people or have worked for other businesses, so let's try those. I was too naive to know that, and I just taught myself how to code, and I was like, wait, I can just build a CMS. So like I spent 3 months building a CMS from scratch at Morning Brew, and I was sitting right next to the writer, so I'd be like, hey, does this work for you? And they'd be like, no, can you change it to do X, Y, Z? And so I think that was like in retrospect a really dumb move potentially because at any point it might have not worked. Also, there's like full companies worth hundreds of millions of dollars dedicated to like building incredible CMSs. And here I am like a year out of college thinking I can build like a world-class CMS for email myself. And we pulled it off and it worked and it was the right decision ultimately. But it was like such a dumb thing in retrospect that worked out really well for us. So that's like one of like the main examples of just being really naive and not knowing better and being young and dumb and just doing what I thought was right and had no checks and balances. Like Austin was like, okay, that sounds cool, I guess. I just did it and I spent 3 months with like, but the fear of it not working is what kept me going. Yeah. Because I couldn't, again, it's like my first job, there's not a ton of oversight of like being told what to do. So the fear of turning to Austin like 3 months later being like, hey, you just paid me 25% of my salary to build something that doesn't work at all, would have scared me shitless and like was enough for me to figure out and overcome any roadblocks that we encountered. We being me, because I was by myself at this time, but yeah.
So you leave college and you skip Deloitte, which would have given you a nice, like, reliable paycheck, which is pretty baller. And then you moved to New York. And where in New York are you living?
So I was in East Village, New York. I did 2 years in East Village, shoebox apartment, but super fun. Like different time, different place in my life. But to be 23 in New York, I'd say the first 2 months like very wide-eyed, right? Like big city, just came from school, and just the opportunities to network, hang out with your coworkers, go out for drinks like 7 days a week if you wanted. Like the option was there, and just like the density and pace of New York was like really awesome to be in. And like because we were in media, our office eventually moved down to Wall Street. And so like I just remember getting off the subway every day. We're writing for this like tiny newsletter that's starting to become something. But like walking past like the Raging Bull and like all these other firms on Wall Street, seeing like the New York Stock Exchange and all of the IPOs, and then going into the office and watching our content team write about the IPOs. And I was just like building the tech that helped facilitate this entire engine. And then seeing companies like Bloomberg and everyone else like show us respect and credit for just being this scrappy little newsletter company. And the whole time I'm 24 or 25, just making all these decisions by myself in a lot of areas. It was such like an eye-opening, fun experience. And then like the social currency too of everyone in our demographic of like post-grad, first 4 or 5 years on the job, like living in New York, knew what Morning Brew was. So it was just so cool that everyone like could relate to what I was doing. Or like I'd be on the subway and see people reading Morning Brew, and I was like, I literally just built that feature like yesterday.
Oh, that's so
and it was
cool.
Like so sweet. So yeah, like a lot of life, and my life in particular, I feel like is working really hard, but there's a lot of luck of right time, right place, given the right opportunity. because like I could have made any of the other decisions and my life would have been a totally different series of events. But yeah, I'm very fortunate for the decisions I did make and the advice I took along the way.
A lot of people ask, like, is it hard work or luck that makes someone, especially entrepreneurs, successful? So it's interesting that you bring it up. I used to live in the Lower East Side, or East Village, whatever, 8th between B and C. It's like so far down, like when I was 17.
I was on 2nd and B.
Where there was like a Miss Lily's. I don't know if it's still there. It was like really good. I think it's still there.
Yeah.
Cuban food. Oh my gosh, my fake ID. It was quite the time. So what was, like, were they paying you a good amount of money to live in New York at that age?
Fine.
Yeah.
But good salary, like 70 to 90K, I'd say.
And what do you think attributed the success of Morning Brew? It seems like obviously the guy who started it, who you knew from just childhood.
Yeah, I grew up with Austin. He's from Baltimore as well. Like, funny story, we like went to Israel together.
Do you guys do birthright?
I think he went to Jewish day school, so like I think they're like separate path of like they've been in Israel like a bunch. I did birthright separately. But we did something I think our sophomore year or junior year of college where we had internships in Tel Aviv, which was also like one of the coolest experiences. Yeah. We were like 18, too young to drink in the US, but in like Europe and Israel, like old enough to drink. Mm-hmm. And we just had like, my grandfather just like at the time happened to give a lot of his grandchildren like $5,000. So I put that $5,000 towards like having disposable income in Tel Aviv for the summer. And there was, I think, a group of like 25, 30 of us who all had internships in Tel Aviv. And I worked at HP, like the printer company, which is cool. Everyone else kind of like bullshit internships, which was part of the fun. It was like an internship where you didn't do much work. I had like legit mechanical engineering work, which is actually really cool to see. But Austin was on that trip. So we spent 3 months in Tel Aviv together that summer. And while everyone else was like, I mean, we partied a bunch too, but we also would like sit on the beach and just brainstorm ideas and talk about like business models and like just nerd out on like startups. We also like kind of started to teach ourselves how to code. We'd come back from the beach and do something called 1 month Rails, which is like how to learn Ruby on Rails in like 1 month. Like such nerds, but like we were so down and into it. Because like we just saw the opportunity of like, if you could code, you can build things. If you can build things, you can make money. Mm-hmm. And like we were like toying with all these like random ideas and business ideas. We actually had a really funny business idea that I haven't thought about in like probably 5 years until just now.
Good.
Where you could order, it was again like college students thinking about college problems, but it was basically where you could place an order and people on the way back from classes could pick up food. So it's kind of like Uber Eats, but like using students as like the workforce who are like broke and would probably do it. And maybe it was just catered towards like my thinking at University of Maryland, but like, you cross past all the restaurants going to and from on campus, off campus. I was like, oh, if I could just pay someone to pick up food on the way. I don't know, stupid idea, but like that, we had like a whole bit, we would like spend nights in Israel building out a business plan and like a business model. But I bring that up because he mentioned at Michigan, he just started this like email newsletter called Morning Brew. And
Is that how it started?
They were at Michigan. Okay. It was like his co-founder, Alex, was I think a senior and had a little bit of extra time on his hands and started creating like PDF market briefs and sending out to students. And then like more people asked to get on these market briefs and then it became a newsletter. And then Austin came on and they went like classroom to classroom growing it at Michigan. But it was just funny because like we'd be on the beach. He was like, yeah, we're picking up traction. We have like a few thousand readers who like look forward to this email every day. And it's like 2014. It's like the skip was like maybe just starting, but like email newsletters weren't in the mainstream like they are now, I'd say. And I was just like, dude, that's such a dumb idea. Because I was like, who cares? Like at the same time, I was building my tech startup that it was like, oh, cool, two-sided marketplace, tech, sexy, like we're transaction fees, like payments. And he was just sending an email. And to me, I was like, that's the shit. Like I'm building like really cool startup tech. Like this is going to be the one. And he's just sending an email every morning. I go, that's pretty lame. And then fast forward like 3 years and I'm working for him. And then fast forward 8 years, I guess. And now I'm just building an email newsletter company.
Why didn't you guys start a company?
Together?
Yeah.
I mean, at the time, I was definitely like, had my head in my ass with my own startup company. He was building his email newsletter at Michigan. And like, we were just kind of on different paths. But yeah, it's just like a funny, again, like serendipity and like life events. Like we were friendly growing up, like close, played in like the same basketball leagues. Yeah. But just so happened to do this trip separately, be in Israel, talk business. I think that's where it became clear that we were both like very similar in business-minded type topics. So when he called me like 2 years later, just a brainstorm, like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this for Morning Brew. The fact that I was a phone call for him was probably because we spent so much time in Israel just talking about business. Because he had his own like entrepreneurial, not crisis, but like dilemma of like he was working at Moelis, which is like an incredible investment banking firm. But like incredible in the sense they pay you a shit ton, especially to graduate college and get paid $200,000, live in New York.
But you have to work 190 hours.
Yeah, he's probably working 90 plus hours, probably more. So he was coming to me with like, hey, I have a job there, pays incredible, or I could send this email newsletter and it's small, but I see an opportunity. And like, I mean, I'm sure he has his own story of like, he had that same decision to a much larger extent. I was choosing between shitty Deloitte 75K technology consulting and a riskier but interesting move to send email newsletters at Morning Brew for around 75K as well. He was debating younger in his career, do I go to make 200K and do this investment banking and like see houses in the Hamptons in like 10, 15 years? Or do I give all that up to send an email newsletter that's making like not much money? So I think he had probably a more difficult debate, but the common theme is just betting on yourself.
I was gonna say, like, what made you cross the line in terms of making that decision? Because I bet there's a bunch of people listening who are super inspired by this journey you've had and are like, I don't know whether to go to college, I don't know whether to like follow my dreams, but I'm really broke and I don't have any money.
Well, one, in this particular circumstance, Austin like worked backwards. He's like, if we stop getting paid tomorrow, because I was like so on edge, because I knew I had student debt payments upcoming, and it was just such a like my friends all moved to Washington D.C. like right after graduation. So there, it's like a feeding ground for University of Maryland students. So you graduate from Maryland, you move to D.C. and Arlington, you get like a safe job there. Again, like girlfriend there. I had like an apartment with like one of my best friends growing up. So it was a total 180, not just giving up on like the safe job, but also moving to a new city I've never really been to. I think I've been to New York like twice prior to this. And like my entire life and family and everything down in like the DMV. But I guess the one thing is like people make it a lot scarier than it is. At the end of the day, like you still have your education that you went to or your skill set that you learned from other jobs or your drive and interest. It's not like a one-way road. Like it's not like a decision that you can't go back on. Morning Brew could have been like an okay experience and either not for me or failed outright. And I have the story to tell regardless, which I think is the other thing a lot of people don't put enough weight in. I see other people interview for very traditional jobs, get really worked up, like memorize their resume. And you don't realize that the people on the other end of the interview are just people and they want to hear stories. And so I think like humans in general are like all about telling stories and that's what they resonate with. It's like all the studies where you can talk about the number, people are kind of numb to numbers. So you could say this tragic event killed X many people and it doesn't really evoke any sort of emotion. But when you tell the story of like one of the people who died, who was like about to get engaged and like their kids, then you care so much more. And just because like as a species, I think everyone just like aligns more with stories. And so kind of going off on a tangent, but like betting on yourself and doing your own type of trajectory and story creates something to speak about and a vision and a passion that you had and followed. I think even if you go the more traditional route, being able to talk to a hiring manager and explain that you were passionate about something, you made a calculated bet on yourself because of X, Y, Z, and maybe it didn't work out. At that young in your career, like a lot of things aren't going to work out. It's really just taking experiences from it. Like I could have looked at the Venture Storm experience and been like, I tried entrepreneurship, didn't work, it's really hard. There's no adults in the room telling me what to do. There's no playbook of how we get from point A to point B. It's just figure it out or fail, and we failed. And I could have taken that as like a learning experience and spoken to that. Instead, I was like, really cool to be able to make decisions for yourself. And just, I think risk in general is like fun.
Do you feel like every person who wants to be an entrepreneur should go to college just to have the experience? Or now that you've gone to college, but you don't even really need, I guess, this degree?
I'm pretty indifferent on college. Like I'm definitely not like a super opinionated tryhard of like college is amazing or college is a waste of time. For me particularly, like I never really used my mechanical engineering degree. I had like the one internship in Israel when I was younger, which didn't really attribute to much.
I've never met anyone who studied mechanical engineering.
Yeah. Most like I love problem solving, and what I liked about engineering was being given equations or problems and like trying to figure things out. I became like a huge nerd with physics, which is what got me into mechanical engineering. There was like a whole snowball effect of like going back to my high school physics teacher who like, I didn't even know what engineering was, but he like opened my eyes to physics and then engineering, and like that's like what really kicked everything off. But I'm not like a super opinionated try hard on college. It's great. College is like a waste of money. I'm still paying off my student debt. So like from the financial aspect, I think it's a lot of risk and a huge decision to make for people so young, where like if you do study something that isn't as relevant and there isn't a job waiting for you at the other end, like the financial strain is kind of debilitating at times. But I'd also say what I got from college was a network, amazing friends, being surrounded by other really smart people, and being able to see what they accomplished. I think the network's probably the most important thing that I received from college.
I didn't go, but that's honestly what I hear most people say is like the network. Do I think it's worth $60,000 a year? I don't know. I guess it depends
If your
on...
parents are paying for it, it's probably pretty damn great.
Yeah, of course. And I guess it depends if you really have no idea what you want to do with your life, then perhaps it's maybe worth it. But you started Beehiiv, which also I want to ask first, the name. Why? Like MailChimp makes sense.
It's so funny to bring this up because we actually have an intern working on like a brand exercise.
Yeah.
We had a meeting today and it was all about like the values, the vision, the voice and personality of the brand. And one of the questions was like the name. And she like asked me as an intern, she was like, so like give me the backstory behind the name. There like really isn't much one. And I literally said on the call, we should make up a story. Because I get asked this every now and then. And
okay, so here's your...
Make
it up, I'm ready.
The truth is, and we can work backwards and maybe create our own story of what happened, was I'm very OCD when I build something. Like I like to have a foundation. It is hard for me to envision a platform or like the user interface without knowing like what are the colors, what does it look like, what's the name. Because like from the name, you can like stem different like themes or feature like Twitter, tweeting, like the Bird app, like it all kind of ties together. And so I'm just like way too OCD to not start with like a name and color and logo. And so I didn't put much thought into it. And the thinking was a hive of followers, like it's for whether it's newsletters or blog posts or podcasts or video or content creation or just creators at large. You want to have a group of following or like a hive of followers. So a hive of followers, Beehiiv, is like kind of like all the thought that went into it, and then like the domain name wasn't available. And I'm also, the one thing I am fairly opinionated on is like I don't think the name matters. I think if the product is really good and you're solving a pain point, you can put branding and narrative around anything. So like I literally said on this call today, I was like, we could rename the company as dog shit, and if it has an amazing brand behind it and it's solving a problem, people will use dog shit. And I don't know, I haven't tested that theory, but I do think that people over-index on names, and I'd just rather build cool products.
So it was your idea for the name?
Yeah.
But you met the two other guys you started it with where?
So Ben and Jake are my two co-founders. Ben was the first person I ever hired at Morning Brew, which is also like amazingly cool experience too. Because again, like time and place, I was 23, 24 in New York. All my friends and peers were like at the bottom of the totem pole, like just like climbing their way up from their entry-level job in New York or wherever they were living. And I was like leading interview series and like, oh, I have like a few interviews lined up, like I'm hiring for this role. I was like a hiring manager and building my own team at like 24. And so Ben was the first person I've ever hired in my life. And he's amazing. He's like the most non-stereotypical engineer in the sense of he's so passionate about like design. He's so thoughtful. He's so creative. I think there's like a stereotype around engineers that like they need to be fed like the requirements and this is how it should look, this is how it should work. And if you aren't very explicit, you get something back different, which I don't think is like a fair stereotype of engineers. But I think at larger companies, being that I had worked at Google for 10 months, I did see like the rigidness of like actually defining what something should do and how it should work. And maybe they're like trained like that. But Ben was like the opposite. I'd be like, hey, I think we kind of need to build something here. And he'd come back after the weekend and it's 20 times better than I ever expected. It's so creative. Like he always went above and beyond. So like loved working with Ben. It was like me and him in a pod, just like building out all this tech. And also just like sentimental around like the first person I ever hired, and he was like an all-star. So Ben was amazing. And we'd always talk about like, yeah, it's cool building tech for like the Morning Brew employees. We were building for like our team of content writers and the salespeople. So we had like 20, we built for like the readers, but it was mostly like internal tech for the team. And so we're building tech for 25 people. And I think engineers want to build for like millions of people is like the goal. Like I want to build software that millions of people touch. And so we'd always like sit around at lunch and be like, wouldn't it be cool if we built something that like more than just like 25 people got to play with? And like as the tech got better and better, it was like, why don't we build something kind of like this, but like for other newsletter operators? And so it's funny, the impetus for Beehiiv, I went to Alex and Austin and said, we should white label our internal tech so any newsletter could plug into our tech and have the same exact ecosystem that Morning Brew has. What I didn't know was they were already like 6 months in or however many months into like the acquisition talks. And it's really hard at like the last minute being like, oh, actually we're a software company too. It's like a distraction. It's like a totally different business model. There's a lot of media companies that try to become a software company. I think Vox just like shut down. They're like CMS.
A lot of them have, yeah.
So I understand why they kind of said no to that. But it's just funny, like I kind of pitched Beehiiv to be a part of Morning Brew way back when. And it was because me and Ben would like nerd out on like, what if we white labeled all of this? So that's how I met Ben, is like I hired him at Morning Brew. We always had like ideas about building this. And then when I left Morning Brew, my other co-founder, Jake, is a college friend of Ben's. And like they were like buddies in college, both software engineering. And the thinking was, as I was leaving Bandwidth, like leaving the company, we need another engineer to come in. Ben recommended Jake. I interviewed Jake. Ben's like, Jake's the smartest person I know. I interviewed Jake. I was like, he's an all-star. I don't care as much because I'm leaving, but like you should definitely hire him.
Yeah. So
he joined as I left. And in between Morning Brew and Google, I actually got COVID. I was supposed to go to San Diego, and like the best time to travel is when in between jobs, because when you travel, when you have a job, you know that there's emails and work waiting for you. You're just kind of neglecting it. But in between jobs, you have no responsibility. So I was so excited to go to the West Coast and travel and lay on the beach. Got COVID, was stuck in my room in New York, and I can't sit still ever. So I was like, wait, what can I build in this 1 week where I like can't really hang out with people or do anything? I called Ben and I go, what do you think about building like kind of like Morning Brew in a box? Substack just raised a ton of money. I think there's a huge opportunity to build like a newsletter platform, and we know it better than anyone else because we've already built this. And Ben's like, if we do this, like I think we should bring on Jake. Jake's the smartest person I know. I was like, well, Ben, you're the smartest person I know. So that just makes perfect sense, and that's kind of like how we started that.
And there was no kind of hurt feelings with the Morning
No,
Brew?
there was a lot of hurt feelings.
Okay.
We were on rocky ground for a while. One is like, I think not many people left Morning Brew. It really was like an incredible culture, great place to work. Everyone's like so young and fun, and like it's New York, and we're like a fun like media upstart. So I was like one of very few people to leave at the time. And it was kind of like, I just knew that they were going to legitimize and hire like more senior people. And I was definitely kind of like a little stubborn of like, I don't really want to report to anyone else because I feel like I know this space better. I built everything. It's a classic problem I think a lot of startups have, is like early employees do build a lot of the core foundation. And sometimes they're like 24, 25 and not the most experienced. Like they're good at a company that's from 2 to 10 employees. Totally different ballgame like when you're 50 to 100 employees. And so it's like the natural life cycle of a company to legitimize and bring in like more senior people. And I saw the writing on the wall that someone from like Vice or Vox that's been a PM for 6 years was going to come in and be my boss. I was like, I don't know. Like, I don't really want to learn from someone who's been at Vice for 6 years. No offense to Vice. Mm-hmm. But like media tech wasn't like my real passion. If I wanted to learn tech and product management, I wanted to do it from like a tech capacity, which is what led to Google. So there's a little bit of that. I like didn't give them, I think feelings were always like getting like, it was like getting a little tense towards the end anyway, which is also part of the reason I wanted to leave. Like I love Alex and Austin. Like they were incredible bosses, mentors, friends, but like mostly friends. And I knew that like as we hit this next stage of the business, we were going to keep butting heads. I was like, one, like Morning Brew's going to do really well. They have an amazing network. Yeah. They're great friends. Like I don't want to ruffle feathers and ruin this relationship. So kind of like bowed out. And like in the attempts, like selfishly for my own reason, like wanted to go do something different. Selfishly and stubbornly didn't want to report to someone else. Also like wanted to maintain the friendship and not ruin that. But I would say the first like 10-ish months after like we left and we were kind of building this on the side, they were like pretty pissed off for sure. I asked them to invest initially. They didn't want to touch it.
Do they invest now?
Yeah, now they're both investors actually, which is great. Now it's like come full circle. Yeah, we have a lot of like the Morning Brew Mafia, like early employees that I was like in the weeds with there, or either advisors, investors, supporters in some capacity. So it's come full circle, like it's great now. But I'd say like early days when we were unproven and like we weren't, where there was no need to take our side. And I also like the engineering team at Morning Brew wasn't massive. So I go, hey, I'm taking Ben and Jake.
Yeah.
They're like, okay, well, that's kind of like 2/3 of our engineering team. Like that's kind of fucked up. So I understand why they were pissed off. They also just got acquired and now they have a boss. And Business Insider's like, hey, we expect X, Y, Z growth. We need these features. We need this type of revenue. And they're being handicapped by me because I'm taking 2 of their engineers. So I totally get like both sides, right? But everything's good now, and yeah.
So the actual idea for Beehiiv was in what year?
Like we started building it on nights and weekends in 2020.
Okay.
Somewhere between like 2019 and 2020, we were probably sitting around at Morning Brew and being like, there's something here.
And then in 2023 now, when did you start being able to pay yourself? Like, how much did it cost to even make this happen initially?
Yeah, so started building nights and weekends 2020. So like, I think everyone has the perception that entrepreneurs like just love risk. But I actually think entrepreneurs are like some of the most at risk adverse type people. And we did this in like the least risky way possible. Like one, again, coming for where I am still young in my career, like was more so at the time. I still have a ton of student debt. Like there was no option to just go, hey, I'm gonna work on this and not make money and not get paid and just see if it works and hope that we start eventually making money. Like I think a lot of people in the media glamorize like barely paying yourself, eating like ramen and like
so dumb.
Yeah, it's so dumb. And some of the VCs that like encourage that because it like builds character and like you have to earn like whatever, like doesn't really vibe with me whatsoever. But we built it for 10 months, nights and weekends. So totally de-risked. Like we had our full-time jobs. They were at Morning Brew. I was at Google. I'd close my work laptop. I'd open my personal laptop, work all night, work all weekends. Coding. Because at this time, there's like no marketing. There's no support. Like, it doesn't exist yet. It's just coding. Which is also really stressful because Google wasn't the most stressful job, but it was kind of like having 2 jobs. Morning Brew was like still very much like a startup and they were hustling and building and like they also were married and so they have like a wife and they like close their work laptop and I'd be like, hey, I know that it's like been a long week for you, but we got to build this shit because like, I see like a real opportunity here. And it took a lot of convincing to show them like, one, I think this can be successful. One, I think we make a lot of money. I did like a lot of selling. I was like, you can be your own boss. We're going to build something cool and you get to decide how we build it, when we build it. And it was like selling my co-founders, not that they're risk adverse, but like with a wife and different stage of life. I was all gas, no brakes from the beginning. So anyway, we finally end up getting to the point where the product's almost done summer of 2021, which is when I'm in Venice. We raised money. They're still at Morning Brew full time. I'm at Google full time, technically. I'm raising money and talking to VCs, seeing what the appetite is. Finally get a few commits. Social leverage comes in to lead our round, in our seed round. And as soon as you wire the money, I'll put my 2 weeks in. So we signed the term sheet, they wired money. We had money sitting in our bank. I put my 2 weeks in, started paying myself day one. They put their, I think, 3-4 weeks in advance because at this point I'm talking to Austin and Alex and like, I don't want to like totally screw them over. So I think they do 4 weeks to like wind down their projects. And as soon as they join full time, they have health insurance, salary, everything.
How did you get in front of these investors?
Partially just like being in New York and my network was people in media, doing newsletter stuff. I've like written different blog posts while I was at Morning Brew about the work that I was doing. Morning Brew, it helps like when Morning Brew was so successful too. So the narrative and pitch even to this day in our marketing is, we were early at Morning Brew. We understand what it took to build and scale. Now we are trying to build similar software that is accessible for anyone with an audience to monetize a newsletter. And so that narrative stuck really well. I was in LA. There's also like a lot of social capital in making introductions in life in general. And so fundraising for me was like just texting a few people that are in the startup space, maybe in VC. Hey, we're looking to build this company. We're a few weeks out from launching. Do you know any VCs? Or are you interested in investing? And they'd always be like, no, I'm not investing, but here's 5 people that might. So it's like a branch out effect. So those 5 people I have calls with, 4 of the 5 are like not interested, but I do know people more in the media space who might be. They introduce you to 5 more people. And it just became like this merry-go-round of like one introduction led to 5 introductions, led to 10 introductions. I was just taking calls, annoying everyone in our dentist house, saying the same thing over and over again. Pitching, changing the pitch, playing around with it. At the time when we raised our seed, Twitter just bought Review, like I think a year earlier. Facebook just launched Bulletin, like I think a month earlier. And Substack was like the dominant player in the space. So raising, despite like the founder market fit, was a total pain in the ass because they're like, not only is there a clear dominant player being Substack, but there's legacy players like MailChimp and all these other who are huge. Big tech is getting interested. So Twitter and Facebook now have a company or a product directly rivaling what you're building. So why would you win now? You're late to it, and big tech with infinite budgets are now getting involved in this space. And then fast forward to today, Review got shut down by Twitter. Bulletin got shut down by Facebook. Substack's around. But there's like a lot of room for innovation and competition. And yeah.
Are you allowed to say how many users you guys have?
We have like 100,000 signups right now.
And how did you get that? Like originally, to even get that first round, how did you get people to use Beehiiv?
Yeah, so it almost sounds so straightforward that I don't know why more people don't do it, but our initial seed round was very strategic, and like I would approach people that had, so I guess to answer your question, like how we raise money, outside of just introductions, I would go to people who had newsletters on Substack, on MailerLite, on MailChimp, and be like, are you happy with your software? And I already knew that they were a little bit further along in their career, could likely make it like a small check as an investment. And so our round was social leverage was the majority, like they led the seed round, but we had I think 25 other strategic investors from editor-in-chiefs at media companies to like Liquidity, like the meme account has like 100,000 person email list.
Okay.
And so the go-to-market was like, let's have our investors who are now financially invested in us succeeding move their newsletter from XYZ platform to our platform. So they were our early adopters from the get-go. And because I approached them because I knew they were large, it wasn't like they had like a 200 person email list. Like Liquidity had 100,000 emails. He was sending on another platform. He moves to us. He has like a better styled newsletter. He has a referral program. He has like all these flashy features. And at the bottom it says powered by Beehiiv. So everyone pays attention to like the new style of email. It's like what changed here, and they can scroll around and find out pretty quickly that they moved the platform. So you multiply that exact case study by like 50 by the strategic investors and friends of friends and colleagues, and that was like our initial early adopters.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. So you guys just raised more money, and what is your goal? Like you're probably gonna get acquired. Do you think about that?
No, because I've always like disliked the like what is the end goal, because you can't like. If you were to ask me 5 years ago, where would you be in 5 years? I would have never guessed this, because there's so many things that happen along the way, and like new doors open, other doors close as you progress through your trajectory. And so, for example, people are like, where do you want Beehiiv to be in 5 years? And like my answer right now is I just want to get to $1 million in revenue a month by December. Because what doors that opens, I don't know, but I won't know until I get there. And that could mean, do we acquire other companies? And do we actually become a leader in the space where maybe, like IPO sounds so funny when you're like 18 months old. And whenever people ask, like, are you going to IPO one day? It's like, I don't know if any company starting off very early on ever thought about IPO, but you just kind of keep growing steadily. Then you make a few acquisitions and then you grow a little bit more. And then like your options either become like get acquired, remain private, or like IPO. So like, I'm not saying IPO is on like the long-term horizon. I'm just acknowledging that I don't know what I don't know. And I think more of like, not short-term, but 6 months from now, I want to be doing double the revenue. If we can do that, our team will be larger, we'll be a stronger player in the space, and maybe we'll be more attractive to someone who would acquire us. If the opportunity is not there and we think we could serve our users better independently, then we'll keep doing that.
What's one thing someone would know about you, Tyler?
Would know.
Wouldn't
know about me. It's a great question. You need to tell me about these in advance so I'm not so flat-footed.
You know, the funny thing is I have never pre-prepared for any of these. I literally have come up with every question I've asked you on the top of my head.
Well, I never prepare for, even when people send me the questions in advance, I usually don't, unless they're like these like quick.
I don't understand how you do this as a job and you pre-send people questions. Like the thing I'm good about with my job is that I could literally talk to an ant. Like a small
Yeah, I mean, it's good. If you can't, then it's probably not the right job for you, but it makes sense. One thing that people don't know about me. Interesting. I mean, because we spoke about it earlier, like physics is like something I completely nerd out on. Love physics. I just read a book on quantum physics. My favorite my favorite movie is Interstellar. Just watched it again this past weekend. Like, that's like what really got me into engineering, which got me into software, which got me into startups. But it really was just like physics and acknowledging like a lot of people don't understand how the world works, and I find it so fascinating.
Okay, interesting. And before anyone says anything, we're going to clarify you're drinking water, not vodka, out of this wine glass.
It would be pretty badass if I was drinking
hours
vodka.
ago, minutes ago. Tyler, where can everyone find you on social media? I guess sign up for Beehiiv.
Sign up for Beehiiv. Follow Beehiiv. You have to explicitly say it's spelled incorrectly.
I know. So I was going to say that.
Beehiiv. So 2 I's, no E at the end. I'm on Twitter. Is probably my most active platform, so Dank_tweets. I'm now public on Instagram, so might as well pump the numbers. Like, follow me on Instagram.
Threads.
For sure. Threads, I'm pretty opinionated on Threads. I don't think it's going to work, but I'm there. Not very active, but Twitter and Instagram, shoot me a follow.
And I DM'd you on Twitter to get you on this podcast.
Yeah, and I think you DM'd me on Instagram as well.
Did I DM you on Instagram? I thought it was Twitter. I followed you on Instagram. But yeah, I might have moderately harassed you because I really wanted you on this podcast.
It's fine.